Imagine standing at the edge of greatness, knowing that every breath you take could either lead you to immortality or to a tragic end. For these daredevils, from Bill Warner racing across land at over 300 miles per hour, to Alex Harville pushing the limits of gravity in a record-breaking jump, to Sailendra Nath Roy dangling from a zip line by nothing but his hair. Each one lived a life that tested the very boundaries of human possibility. They all chased the impossible. Some made history, others met their fate in front of millions watching. Javad Palisbanian was seconds away from breaking his own record, only to crash into 13 buses, while Carl Wallenda, walking the wire at 73 years old, became a victim of wind and faulty lines, falling from 121 feet to his death. Each one had the same drive, the hunger to defy what others thought was impossible. But in their pursuit of greatness, they came face to face with the undeniable truth. The price of glory is often paid in full. These are 10 tragic world record attempts caught on camera. On January 4th, 1967, Donald Campbell, the man who had already conquered both land and water speed records, met his ultimate fate in an attempt to break his own water speed record, pushing the limits of human achievement one final time. But Campbell wasn't just chasing a number, he was chasing history. The son of legendary record breaker Sir Malcolm Campbell, Donald was determined to honor his father's legacy. But not just by breaking his records. From an early age, Campbell had a passion for speed that was almost obsessive. Growing up in Surrey, England, he watched as his father set 13 land and water speed records, inspiring a young boy to follow in those very same tracks. After his father's tragic death in 1948, Donald stepped up to continue the legacy, inheriting his father's Bluebird K4 and taking on the task of breaking the records his father had set, even on the same lakes where Sir Malcolm had become a legend. But this was just the beginning of Donald's quest to go even further. By 1964, Donald had shattered both the land speed record, hitting 403 miles per hour in Australia, and the water speed record at 276 miles per hour. But 276 miles per hour wasn't enough. Not for Donald. He knew that the next step was to break the 300 miles per hour barrier on water, to push the boundaries of human endurance and engineering beyond anything that had ever been achieved. But there was something about Donald Campbell that made him different from most men. He was superstitious. He believed that luck played as much of a role in his speed as did his skill. He hated the color green, couldn't have 13 of anything, and thought nothing good ever happened on a Friday. But there was one thing Donald was absolutely certain of. Wednesday, January 4th, 1967, would be the day he would break his own record. On that fateful morning, with a clear sky, calm water, and just enough wind, Coniston Water in northern England was as still as a mirror. Perfect conditions for a world record attempt. Donald was ready. The boat was ready. But there was one thing nobody could predict: the outcome. As Donald climbed into the cockpit of his Bluebird K7, an aging hydroplane designed for 250 miles per hour, he knew he was pushing it to the absolute limit. The boat had already survived a crash that nearly took his life years before, but this time he felt ready. Mr. Woppet, his lucky mascot, sat by his side, a small, cheerful toy bear he believed brought him good fortune. The crowd gathered along the lake's edge, cameras flashing, as the hometown hero prepared for yet another record-breaking run. Donald gunned the throttle, and the Bluebird K7 shot off the water. He quickly passed 250 miles per hour, the boat's design limit, and kept going. The speedometer climbed, needle bending toward the 300 miles per hour mark. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was going perfectly, but then something started to go wrong. Donald's voice crackled over the radio to his team. "I can't see much," he said, his tone shaky. "The water's not good." His team didn't worry. This kind of trouble happened all the time in the sport. Donald knew how to handle it, but then the boat started to lift, and just 3 degrees of lift. 3 degrees was all it took. The Bluebird K7 became unstable. The front of the boat bucked into the air like a wild horse, and the wind caught the hull. Donald could feel the boat slipping from his control. But he didn't stop. He radioed in, full power. He was determined to make the record. For a moment, it looked as though the Bluebird K7 might fly, but then the boat flipped, launching 50 feet into the sky, almost as though it were trying to take off like a plane. Time seemed to slow, but the world was about to watch, as history would be written in blood and fire. The boat crashed back to Earth, flipping and twisting violently as it slammed into the water. The radio cut off. The final transmission from Donald was disturbing. "I'm upside down." The Bluebird K7 was shattered, sinking rapidly beneath the lake's surface. The crowd, already stunned by the chaos, was left in horrified silence as the wreckage disappeared into the depths. Rescue crews rushed to the scene, hoping against hope that Donald might have somehow survived. But when the boat was recovered, there was no sign of life. The Bluebird K7 had taken its final voyage, and with it, the man who had dedicated his life to breaking records. Donald Campbell's body was never found immediately. For weeks, divers searched Coniston Water, but they didn't have the proper equipment to reach the boat's resting place, nearly 120 feet below. For over 30 years, the lake kept its secret. Then in 2001, after years of waiting, the wreckage was finally found, and with it, the truth about what had killed Campbell. When they pulled the wreckage from the lake, they found Donald's body, decapitated by the impact. It was a heartbreaking moment for his family, who had never given up on bringing him home. Mr. Woppet, the lucky mascot, was still there at the helm, but Donald's luck had run out. His quest for speed had cost him everything. Donald Campbell's legacy lives on in the annals of speed records. The man who sought to push the boundaries of possibility left a mark that can never be erased. But that final jump on January 4th, 1967, will always be remembered as one of the greatest tragedies in motorsport history. On June 17, 2021, Alex Harville rolled up to the Moses Lake Air Show at Grant County International Airport in Washington. The air show was about to kick off its first day, and Alex was the star. The crowd had gathered, eager to watch him attempt a world record jump, a jump no one had ever attempted before, a 351-foot leap across the air. Alex had already broken 2 Guinness World Records, but today he was ready to set the biggest one of his life. Born and raised in Ephrata, Washington, Alex had been riding dirt bikes since he was 4 years old. His childhood was spent on 2 wheels, idolizing legends like Evel Knievel, dreaming of the moment he could push the limits just like his hero. But Alex wasn't just trying to copy Knievel. He wanted to go bigger, faster, further. Every jump, every stunt was about reaching the next boundary. The man who'd already set the longest ramp-to-dirt jump at 425 feet and the longest dirt-to-dirt jump at 298 feet was chasing history. But today, he wasn't just trying to break a record. He was aiming to make the impossible possible. But what Alex didn't know was that this jump, meant to launch him into fame and fortune, would end in tragedy. Weeks before, Alex had posted updates on Instagram, sharing images of the ramp being built and the massive landing pad, nearly a football field away. He was preparing for the impossible. But even Alex, with all his experience, couldn't predict what would happen next. The warm Thursday morning seemed perfect for the attempt. Alex lined up, revved the engine, and gunned the throttle. His motorcycle roared to life, shooting forward like a rocket. 95 miles per hour, the speed he needed to make the jump, was achieved in seconds. The crowd went silent as they saw his final approach. Everything seemed on track. His bike hit the ramp, soared into the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though Alex had done it. He was going to make the gap. But then it all went wrong. Alex's bike came down just 5 feet short of the landing ramp. The front tire hit the edge of the landing berm, and in an instant, everything went sideways. The bike slammed into the dirt with full force, throwing Alex over the handlebars, losing his helmet as he flew through the air. He landed roughly 20 feet away, his body crashing violently against the unforgiving ground. Medical crews, already on standby for such high-risk stunts, were on him in seconds. The crowd stood frozen as the paramedics scrambled to stabilize him. Alex, though clearly injured, was conscious. His family, who had been there to witness the jump, watched in horror as they rushed him to the hospital, but the injuries were too severe. Alex had died from blunt force trauma caused by the impact with the handlebars during the crash. Alex wasn't just a daredevil, he was a father, a husband, and someone who lived with a fierce need to push limits. His wife, Jessica, and their two young sons, Willis and Watson, were there that day. Watson, just a month old, would grow up without knowing the full story of his father's legendary spirit. Fellow riders and fans from all over the world, including world record holder Robbie Madison, expressed their grief. In August 2022, Guinness World Records officially recognized Alex's 2012 record, the 425-foot ramp-to-dirt jump, ensuring his legacy as one of the greatest motorcycle jumpers in history. But no record could replace what had been lost. In his final moments, Alex had been chasing something more than fame or recognition. He was chasing history. Imagine falling from the sky faster than any human has ever dared before. You're in freefall, racing through the air at over 150 miles per hour, nearly 24 miles high, with only your parachute between you and a violent death. Nick Piantanida had always been a man who pushed limits, never satisfied with the ordinary. Born in Union City, New Jersey in 1932, he grew up with an unquenchable thirst for adventure. He wasn't like other kids. Instead of playing with toy parachutes, he strapped them to stray cats and threw them from his apartment window, watching the animals plummet to the ground. When neighbors complained, Nick took the dare to a new level. He strapped himself into the parachute and jumped, breaking his arm on the fall. But this setback only fueled his desire to conquer the skies. Nick's childhood was just the beginning of his story. As an adult, he joined the US Army, becoming more fearless with every new challenge. He was the first person to climb the sheer cliffs of Angel Falls in Peru, a feat that put him on the map as a born adventurer. But no matter what he conquered, there was one thing that kept calling him back: parachuting. At 31 years old, Nick took his first skydiving class, and after just one jump, he made a decision. He would be the first person in history to jump from 120,000 feet, a height that would shatter the world record. At that point, the highest jump on record was a Soviet jump at 83,000 feet, but Nick didn't care about records alone. He wanted more. He wanted to push the boundaries of what humans could do. 120,000 feet was his goal, and nothing would stop him from reaching it. The only problem? Nick had little experience at these extreme heights. With just a single skydiving class and a few jumps under his belt, he was hardly the expert needed to attempt such a death-defying feat. But that didn't stop him. Determined to make this dream a reality, Nick found a job as a truck driver, using the weekends to teach himself everything he could about balloon technology, meteorology, and survival suits. He wasn't just learning how to jump from a balloon, he was learning how to survive the jump. He wrote letters to NASA asking for help with his gear. He reached out to engineers to create the perfect space balloon. He even wrote to the president, asking for funding to help him break the world record. Whatever it took, Nick got it. Over the course of 2 years, Nick built his Strato jump capsule, a rudimentary styrofoam and steel gondola designed to take him higher than any human had ever gone. But his first jump, in 1965, ended in failure. The balloon ripped and Nick parachuted into a dump. He didn't quit though. He went back to the drawing board and tried again. On his second attempt, he reached 123,000 feet, breaking the record for the highest solo balloon flight. But as he prepared to jump, his oxygen tank got stuck to the gondola. He couldn't get it free, and without the jump, there was no record. He burst the balloon and came back to Earth with the safety parachute still attached. Still, Nick wasn't done. His third attempt was going to be the one. On May 1st, 1966, Nick launched from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This time, everything was ready. The weather was perfect. His team was in position. Nick was going to break the world record. At 57,000 feet, things began to go wrong. Over the radio, Nick's team heard a weird whooshing sound. Then his voice, scrambling in panic. He shouted something, but before they could react, the transmission cut off. The team waited, holding their breath. Minutes passed. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Still no word from Nick. The team, unsure of what had happened, decided to cut the balloon loose remotely. The gondola floated down, but when the team found Nick, he was alive but unconscious, still strapped into his seat. His visor was open, a small mistake that would cost him everything. Some say Nick opened the visor to clear condensation, a natural instinct at those heights. But in doing so, he exposed himself to the decompression effects. The pressure inside the suit was released too quickly. Air bubbles formed in his bloodstream and tissues, tearing apart his body from the inside. Nick was rushed to the hospital, but his body had already been shattered. He slipped into a coma and never regained consciousness, dying 4 months later. Nick Piantanida's final jump wasn't just an attempt to break a record, it was a man's quest to conquer what seemed impossible. But in the end, the cost of chasing greatness was more than his body could withstand. On March 22, 1978, Karl Wallender, the fearless daredevil who had defied death countless times, took one final step into the air. And it would be his last. Born into a family with a long history of death-defying performances, Karl was destined to become a legend. The Wallender family had been thrilling audiences with their death-defying stunts for decades, traveling through towns and villages across Europe and America, performing for crowds who were willing to risk their lives for a taste of adventure. But for Karl, it wasn't enough to just perform. He was obsessed with speed, precision, and the impossible. By the time Karl was 6 years old, he was already performing balance acts for the public, showing off his natural talent. By age 11, he was performing in beer halls in Germany, where he wowed the crowds with an act that involved balancing on top of unstable chairs. But the moment that changed everything came when he saw an advertisement in a local paper looking for an experienced hand balancer. Karl applied without hesitation. He quickly became a skilled high-wire performer, eventually developing his own signature acts that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. In 1928, the Wallenders were ready to perform at Madison Square Gardens. Their act, a 7-person pyramid, drew huge crowds, and soon they were touring with the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, one of the most prestigious circus companies in the world. The Flying Wallenders were born, but while the fame came, so did tragedy. The Wallenders experienced their first major loss when Karl's brother, Willy Wallender, fell during a high-wire act while riding a bicycle. The safety net failed, and Willy tragically died. This loss haunted Karl and left him with a deep distrust of safety nets. He would later insist that the lack of safety equipment made performers more cautious and aware of the risks they took. This philosophy defined his entire career. In 1944, while performing in Hartford, Karl and his family narrowly escaped a fire in a circus tent that killed 160 people. But despite this, the Wallenders didn't back down. They kept performing, they kept pushing, they kept walking the high wire, and each time they did, the stakes got higher. By 1970, at the age of 65, Karl performed one of his most daring stunts, walking across the Tallulah Falls Gorge in Georgia, suspended 750 feet above the ground. He didn't just walk the wire, he performed handstands to prove that nothing could stop him. 30,000 spectators gathered to watch as Karl made his way across, and when he reached the other side, his wife Helen was there waiting with a martini. Karl had done it again, but he was only just getting started. In 1978, at the age of 73, Karl Wallender made a fateful decision. The circus had been in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and ticket sales were low. Karl believed that a televised wire walk would generate interest, so he agreed to perform a high wire walk between the two wings of the Condado Plaza Hotel. It was a stunt that would once again see him walking high above the crowd without a safety net. The conditions were perfect: clear skies, calm air, and an eager crowd. But strong winds began to pick up as Carl stepped onto the wire, holding a weighted pole to help him maintain balance. At first, all seemed well, but as Carl approached the middle of the wire, something went wrong. He appeared to lose his balance for a split second. Wobbling dangerously, Carl fought to steady himself, but the wire had become unstable. As he tried to adjust, the wire tilted again. And then, to the shock of the crowd, Carl slipped. The moment he fell was captured on live television. Carl plummeted 37 meters, 121 feet, to the paved road below. The sudden crash shattered the silence, and the onlookers rushed to the scene. Despite immediate medical attention, Carl Wallender was pronounced dead at the hospital. The man who had spent his life defying death, pushing the limits of what humans could do, had fallen at last. The investigation revealed that two guy lines, the supporting cables that stabilized the wire, had been improperly installed, causing the instability during his walk. On October 12, 2002, Audrey Mestre, the woman who defied human limits and pushed the boundaries of freediving, lost her life in a quest to break a world record that would have rewritten history. Born in Saint-Denis, France in 1974, Audrey fell in love with the water before she could even walk. From a young age, she was fascinated by the ocean, its mysteries, and its depths. But unlike most people, Audrey wasn't just content to swim or scuba dive. She wanted to dive deeper than anyone had ever gone before. At just 13, she was already learning the science of diving, writing her thesis on the effects of deep diving on the human body. By 1997, she was training with Francisco Ferreras, a world-renowned freediver, and soon they became inseparable, both as a couple and as fierce rivals in the sport they loved. Francisco wasn't just her partner, he was her mentor, pushing her to go deeper, faster, and farther than she thought possible. But with each dive, the stakes grew higher. The sport of freediving had existed for centuries, but it wasn't until the 20th century that it became a serious, competitive pursuit. Freedivers dive without air tanks, relying solely on their lungs to push them into the depths. The deeper you go, the more your body fights to survive. By the time Audrey had met Francisco, no limits. Freediving, a more dangerous form of the sport, had emerged. In No Limits, divers use a 200-pound weight to drag them to depths of up to 500 feet, and then they use an inflated air balloon to shoot them back to the surface. It's a sport defined by extreme risk and unimaginable physical demands where a diver can experience immense pressure, heart rates that plummet, and lungs that shrink to the size of an orange. Audrey loved it. She embraced the challenge with the same fierce dedication that had defined her life. After all, this wasn't just about setting records. This was about breaking the limits of the human body. At first, Audrey's dives were relatively shallow, 200 feet, maybe 300 feet. But with Francisco's coaching, she was soon doubling her depths, pushing further with each attempt. She went from diving to 500 feet to 520 feet in training. Her body and mind were acclimating to the extreme pressures of deep water, and she was hungry for more. But on October 12, 2002, Audrey set her sights on breaking a record that had eluded all other freedivers, the No Limits freediving record of 531.5 feet, a record set by her own husband Francisco just 2 years earlier. That morning, the conditions on the surface were perfect. Clear skies, calm water. The lake was still, waiting for Audrey's triumphant moment. Her team was ready. Francisco was by her side. Everything seemed in place for her to make history. With a deep breath, Audrey descended into the depths. The weight carried her down quickly, pulling her further and further from the surface. In just over a minute, she had reached 550 feet, and everything seemed fine. She released the weight, feeling the pressure lift, and reached for the air balloon nozzle that would bring her back to the surface. But then, something went wrong. The balloon didn't inflate. Imagine being trapped under the water 550 feet below with no way to rise to the surface. Audrey's body screamed for air, for oxygen. Panic must have crept in. That horrible realization that you are trapped. Audrey's safety divers rushed down to her, and within minutes, they managed to inflate their own air balloons trying to pull her to safety. But even with their best efforts, it was too late. Audrey resurfaced limp and lifeless, her body having been without oxygen for more than 8 minutes. Francisco was the first to reach her. He tried to resuscitate her, but nothing worked. Audrey had drowned. The diving community was rocked by the news of Audrey's death. She wasn't just a freediver. She was an icon. A woman who had defied the odds, who had pushed the human body to places no one else dared go. But for all her courage, the sport was not without its risks. Every year, 100 divers die in extreme freediving attempts. Audrey became one of them. As the diving community began to investigate her death, the cracks started to show. Francisco, her husband, had checked Audrey's gear before the dive, but refused to let anyone else touch it. He didn't have enough safety divers present, and there was no medical team on site, a shocking oversight for a sport that regularly carries life-threatening risks. The more they looked into it, the more questions arose. Why didn't the air balloon inflate? Why had Francisco ignored safety protocol? Why were there so few safety divers when Audrey's dive was one of the most dangerous in history? Had they cut corners in a race to break records? The answers were never clear, and Audrey's death left more questions than answers. In the aftermath, the freediving community took a hard look at the dangers of no-limits freediving. The diving board eventually refused to recognize records set in this category due to the inherent dangers involved. But Audrey's legacy still lives on. As a woman who was unafraid to push the limits, who sacrificed everything to make history. Audrey Mestre's tragic death reminds us of the fine line between passion and danger. Sometimes chasing history comes with a price, and for Audrey, that price was her life. But before we continue, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Sailendra Nath Roy's death was tragic. A man who spent his life defying gravity, using his own hair as a tool to achieve the impossible, only to die suspended in mid-air. Born in India, Sailendra Nath Roy was more than just a daredevil. He was a visionary, a man who saw the world's limits and immediately sought to push them further. By 2011, Roy was already breaking records that seemed impossible. His most iconic achievement? Crossing a zip line suspended by nothing but a loop tied to his ponytail, a stunt that would earn him a Guinness World Record. His ultimate dream was to become the first person in the world to cross a zip line for over 500 meters. Not just any zip line, but one he would dangle from by his hair, something that had never been done before. In 2013, Roy found himself in northeast India, where the stage was set for his most daring stunt yet. The weather was calm, the location perfect, and the crowds were ready. But Roy's plan was more ambitious than ever. He wanted to push beyond the limits, breaking his own record and becoming a legend in the process. As he stood at the edge of his zip line, suspended hundreds of feet above the ground, it seemed like he was about to achieve greatness once again. As he was strapped into position, Roy secured the loop around his ponytail and climbed the platform. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The audience stood in awe, watching the man who had so often danced with death, preparing for another leap into the unknown. The air was still, the zip line was ready, and Sailendra Nath Roy was poised to make history again. The first few seconds of his journey were flawless. Roy glided through the air, the rush of the wind against his face as he powered across the wire. Everything seemed perfect, but then something went terribly wrong. Halfway across the zip line, Roy suddenly stopped moving forward. The crowd, once cheering, began to fall silent as they saw him struggling in mid-air, completely still. Roy's ponytail had become tangled in the pulley, the very tool he relied on to keep him suspended. With no way to move forward or backward, he was trapped. Imagine being suspended in the air, trapped by your own ambition, knowing that if you don't move fast enough, the consequences could be fatal. For 20 minutes, Roy remained dangling, helplessly trying to free himself. Below, his family and friends who had come to watch were powerless to help. They could only watch in horror, waiting, praying for a solution that never came. The zipline crew scrambled to bring him down, but it was already too late. By the time they reached Roy, the damage was already done. His body, deprived of oxygen for too long, had suffered irreparable harm. He was rushed to the hospital, but his heart couldn't survive the strain. Sailendra Nath Roy died from a heart attack, triggered by the physical and emotional stress of being suspended in mid-air for those agonizing moments. On February 22, 2015, Juan Francisco Guillermo, a man who spent almost 5 years pedaling across the globe, chasing a world record that would have made history, tragically lost his life just days before completing his dream. Born in Chile, he started his journey in 2010, leaving behind his home and family to pursue a feat that seemed impossible. His mission? To become the first person to cycle around the world, breaking the record for the longest distance ever ridden, 250,000 kilometers, with nothing but his bicycle and the open road. With every passing year, Juan pedaled through South America, Africa, Asia, and even Europe, riding over treacherous terrain, battling the elements and pushing his body to the breaking point. He had faced brutal heat in the deserts of Africa, struggled through mountainous ranges, and battled physical exhaustion. Yet, despite the challenges, Juan had made it this far, clocking up over 140,000 kilometers. He was months away from completing his journey when fate took a devastating turn. On February 22, 2015, in the northeast of Thailand, Juan was just days away from entering his final leg of the journey, heading toward Australia with the world record within reach. But that morning, as he rested at the side of a road near Nakhon Ratchasima, the unthinkable happened. A pickup truck swerved into his path, scraping his bike and striking him directly. The impact was instant and fatal. The man who had cycled across continents was now gone, his journey cut short by a split second of carelessness. Incredibly, his wife, Ung Po Leng, and their 2-year-old son were with him on the road at the time of the accident. His wife suffered minor injuries and their son had scrapes, but Juan Francisco Guillermo, the man who had taken on the world, was gone. The driver of the pickup was arrested shortly after, charged with careless driving, leading to death and injury, but it was cold comfort to the family that had just lost everything. Juan had spent 5 years, 140,000 kilometers, riding across continents, battling the odds, and becoming a hero in his own right. But the tragedy of his death reminds us that in the pursuit of greatness, there's always a thin line between victory and loss. On August 26, 2005, Javad Palisbanian, the man who had conquered some of the most daring stunts on his motorcycle, tried to make history. But that day, history was made in a way no one expected. In 2005, Javad was preparing to make his most audacious attempt yet, a feat that would surpass his own limits and put him in the record books forever. His plan was simple, in theory: jump across 22 full-sized buses, a distance of over 200 feet. The venue was set at Azadi Sports Stadium in Tehran, with thousands watching from the stands and cameras capturing every moment, for millions tuning in on Iranian state television. He revved the engine and took off, the bike soaring into the air with incredible speed. Javad's heart raced. The distance was long, but he had done this many times before. For a moment, it looked like he was going to make it. His trajectory was spot on, and the audience gasped as he crossed the air. But then something went horribly wrong. Javad's motorcycle slammed into the 13th bus, his body and the bike twisting mid-air. The crowd's cheers turned to horrified silence as they watched the terrifying impact unfold. For a few moments, no one knew what had happened. Had he survived the fall? Had he managed to avoid death yet again, as he had done so many times before. But as the dust settled, it became clear. Javad had been thrown from the bike, unable to recover in time. He hit the ground hard and lay motionless, the bike now a mangled heap next to him. Rushed to the hospital by ambulance, Javad's fate was sealed. He died instantly from blunt force trauma. The man who had dared to defy death so many times had been claimed by it, and his final jump was not the triumph he had hoped for, but a tragic reminder of how fine the line is between victory and defeat. But before we continue, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Imagine diving deeper than any human has ever gone before. 1,200 feet below the surface, where the pressure is so intense it could crush a submarine. Guy Garman, a doctor by trade, had one goal: to become the first person to dive to that unthinkable depth using only scuba gear. But on that day, in August 2015, everything went wrong, and a dream became a deadly nightmare. Guy "Rusty" Garman was no stranger to pushing boundaries. Born in Tennessee, he spent his life as an ear, nose, and throat doctor. But it wasn't just the human body that fascinated him. From a young age, he developed a passion for the water. So in 2010, Garman sold his medical practice and moved his family to the US Virgin Islands. Not for vacation, but to fully immerse himself in scuba diving. He quickly became obsessed, diving deep into the ocean's mysteries, constantly pushing himself to go further, deeper, longer. Under the mentorship of Ed Buckley, a local dive shop owner, Guy's expertise in technical deep water diving grew. Over 600 dives later, he earned his certification. And at the age of 47, Guy set his sights on the world's deepest scuba dive, 1,200 feet, a depth no one had ever reached, using only open-circuit scuba. The previous record was 1,090 feet, set by Ahmed Garber in 2008. But Guy wanted more. He wanted to be the first to break the unimaginable barrier. For 2 years, Guy meticulously prepared for this dive. He studied air mixtures, researched dive conditions, and combed through past attempts. He knew the dangers, the risks were enormous, but the pull of the ocean, the mystery beneath the surface, was stronger. His mission wasn't for fame, for accolades, or for anyone else, it was for himself. To prove that the human body could withstand the extreme pressure of the deepest dive possible. On the morning of August 15, 2015, Guy was ready. He wasn't diving alone. A 200-person safety team was with him, including his son, who would be diving alongside him. But Guy had always been someone who pushed limits. As he descended alone into the dark ocean depths, his support team watched from 200 feet, waiting to meet him later on his way up. This dive would make history, if everything went according to plan. At 6 a.m., Guy took his final breath from the surface and began his descent. The first part was smooth. He reached 200 feet with ease, but once he passed that point, he was on his own. There was no turning back now. His dive continued, each second taking him deeper into the blackness of the ocean, the pressure building, the risk increasing with every foot. At 360 feet, the team waiting at the air station was prepared to assist him. But Guy didn't show up. Minutes turned into hours and still no sign of Guy. The team waited. 3 minutes? 5 minutes? 10 minutes, but Guy didn't return. Was it the gear? Had something gone wrong? The team started to panic, unsure of what had happened in the depths where the light of the sun couldn't reach. The dive was meant to last 38 minutes, but they had waited too long. It was then they realized Guy had drowned. 4 days later, the island police confirmed the recovery of Guy's body. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, but the exact moment everything went wrong remains a mystery. Some experts questioned whether Guy's lack of experience at depths beyond 500 feet had played a part. With only 35 dives below 500 feet before this attempt, and a personal best of 800 feet, many considered his jump to 1,200 feet reckless, almost impossible. But others, including those who knew him best, argued that no one was more planned, prepared, and determined than Guy. He had trained for this moment with the precision of a medical professional, each detail carefully mapped out. And yet, despite the years of preparation, despite the team, despite everything being triple-checked, the ocean was unforgiving. Sometimes, the limits of human endurance can't be pushed beyond a point. On July 14, 2013, Bill Warner pulled up to the starting line at the Loring Air Force Base in Maine, a place where the ground had seen some of the fastest motorcycles in the world. Bill was about to push himself beyond anything anyone had ever done. He was chasing a dream, to hit 300 miles per hour in just 1 mile on his Suzuki Hayabusa, a motorcycle that, if bought off the shelf, could already reach insane speeds. But Bill wasn't just a rider, he was a master of his machine, a mechanic, a marine biology graduate, and a tropical fish farmer who had built his life around speed. Just 2 years earlier, Bill had set a world record of 311 miles per hour over a 1.5-mile stretch, a record that no one had thought possible. He wasn't satisfied. He upped the stakes and aimed for 300 miles per hour in just 1 mile. It seemed impossible to most, but Bill wasn't like the rest. This was a man who'd spent years modifying his Hayabusa, pushing it to its absolute limits. For him, 300 miles per hour was the next frontier. That morning, after a few practice runs, Bill was ready. He knew this would be his final record before retiring. He planned to sell off his bike the very next day and move on to running his own timed events in Texas. He was going out on top. But fate had other plans. Bill revved the bike and hit full throttle. The Hayabusa shot down the runway, its engine screaming, breaking through the air with brutal force. He reached 285 miles per hour, then 290. At that speed, the bike was a blur of motion, the wind almost too loud to hear. But when Bill hit 285 miles per hour, something went wrong. The bike suddenly veered sharply to the right, and in an instant, Bill was off course. The Hayabusa shot off the runway, hurtling into the grass, both Bill and the bike tumbling through the air before crashing hard. Witnesses said the bike slid for another 2,000 feet, the engine still whirring as it skidded to a stop. Bill was still conscious, still talking when the medics arrived, but it was clear the damage was too severe. Despite being rushed to Cary Medical Center in Caribou, Maine, Bill died from his injuries an hour and 15 minutes later, at 11:15 a.m. The impact had ruptured his internal organs, shattered bones, and caused catastrophic injuries. Bill didn't know he was already gone. The investigation into his death was inconclusive. Initial reports pointed to a tire failure or mechanical malfunction, but it was impossible to pin down exactly what had gone wrong. At speeds like that, the smallest issue could be deadly. Bill Warner was a pioneer. He didn't race to be famous, he raced to break barriers. When he set the 311 miles per hour record in 2011, it was a feat that had never been imagined before. The fastest anyone had gone before him was 270 miles per hour. Bill didn't just break the record, he smashed it. The community knew his name. He was the man who dared to chase the impossible, the only rider who could make even the wildest dreams feel achievable. But in the end, the man who could do the impossible was gone. His death shocked the entire land speed racing community. His friends, competitors, and fans spoke of him as someone who had done more for the sport than anyone could have imagined. Tim Kelly, race director of the Loring Timing Association, said, "No one will touch Bill's achievements or be the type of racer he was." Bill wasn't just another racer, he was a trailblazer, a pioneer who set the bar so high that no one would reach it for years to come. After Bill's death, discussions began about improving safety at high-speed events. The crash showed that even the smallest mistake could cost everything. Bill's records may stand for the next 50 years, but his tragic end reminded everyone that the pursuit of greatness always comes with a price. If these stories of ambition, risk, and tragedy left you speechless, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping tales.